So let's thank Kenneth as well. The mastermind behind our discipleship efforts here. We appreciate him. And I'm going to end by kind of summarizing a lot of things we've been talking about, but also thinking how we have conversations about the gospel with those in our context. So I'll be talking particularly about an American context or a Western context. So I'll call this Truth and Grace in a Confused Age. How do we engage our culture with the gospel? Now, we've got pretty good diversity of ages here, which is a blessing. So let me just tell you, historically, in an American context, where Christianity would have been 5 or 6 generations ago, mostly positive towards religion and positive towards Christianity. Well, then there was a sort of slow movement towards just sort of a neutral approach to religion and Christianity. And then maybe in the last decade or so, at least in some areas, there's been a negative approach to Christianity. A lot of factors for that, but there's just sort of this trend that's taking place where we've been following the cultural progression of Europe. I don't think we're going to fully get there. Matter of fact, I think there's a bit of a resurgence we can talk about later, which I'm excited about. As a matter of fact, there's a new study recently where the largest group of Americans who are purchasing paper Bibles are Gen Z. So I think we're going to resist the full movement towards Europe, but still, our country is very polarized, and our city, if I can talk specifically about our city, is extremely polarized. Polarized culturally, polarized politically, and polarized religiously. So we're gonna get all of these sort of narratives I want to talk about in our neighborhoods. So you've got still some places that respect Christians, some that would tolerate us, and some that would oppose us, right? So these are going to be the everyday people you work with in your neighborhoods. I think the biggest danger is not those who oppose our faith, but those who are just indifferent, right? I would much rather have a conversation about Christianity who's angry about Christianity than just, I don't care. They're just indifferent. Because once they reach the place of apathy, it doesn't matter to them. It's like you can't start a fire in their hearts if the fire's been put out. I would rather their fire be raging and they've got issues with Christianity. I like those conversations because I'm going to throw gospel fuel on the fire. If they're just apathetic, it's like, unless there's a fire there, it's really hard to do much. So regardless, though, of the person you're talking to, we're still commanded to go. And we need to do it faithfully. We need to do it lovingly. We need to do it wisely, which is something we'll address here, and also resiliently. So a recent survey asked young adults, they were asked to define truth. So if you were asked that question, what is truth? Just shout something out. We don't need a table talk. What is truth? Whatever God says is true. What's that? God's word. All right. Maybe whatever God says in his word, right, is true. We could say something like that because there's a lot of gods. All right. Yeah. So for us, truth is found in the Bible. That's our basis. Some of the common answers when they were asked this question recently, one said, truth is whatever works for you. Truth is whatever works for you. So consider the worldview that is enveloped around that statement. Truth is whatever works for you. Or the idea of progression. Truth changes as society changes. It's a more of a humanistic or a progressive view of truth. So these are going to be pretty common. There's going to be an individualized answer. There's going to be more of a cultural answer to what truth is. And all this does is reveal the story in which people live. So I'm talking a lot about that. Everybody has a story or a narrative in which they see the world through, right? So a worldview is just how you see the world. And so everybody's going to look at the world through a set of lens. And it's going to be really important for you not to make an assumption. The goal is to figure out what lenses they're looking through to understand how the world works. Otherwise, it's going to be just like this. You're having this conversation, and you're assuming they understand truth the way you understand it, and they're having this conversation, and they don't see it at all like you see it. So they're over here doing this thing, and you're over here doing this thing, and you're wondering, why can't we have a conversation? Why can't you understand what I'm saying? Like, I want to beat you over the head with my Bible because this is the truth that will set you free. And they're like, not into it at all. So you got to understand the narrative that people have. Not too long ago, there was this lady, because I always get my hair cut like at the most, appropriate time for me, because I'm an American. So I'm not going to make an appointment for my haircut. I've got 2 apps on my phone, Great Clips and Sport Clips. And on those apps, I can look at a map, and it can tell me the soonest time where I can go get my haircut in my area. And so I'll look and it'll say 5 minutes. Boom, done. That's an adventure for me because I never know who's going to cut my hair. And then the second thing I love is going home and looking at my wife after a haircut, and she just goes, "What was that? What just happened to your hair?" I kind of like that. And so it's always different. But I also get conversations with different people because I'm never having the same person cut my hair. And I'm sitting there, so we got to talk about something. And so we're talking, and last time I was getting a really bad haircut. And by the way, it's 5 minutes. They cut your hair in 5 minutes, and it's $25 plus a tip. So you add that up per hour. If you make $25 every 5 minutes, you're making like $250,000 a year if you just do the raw math. I know they don't make that much, but anyway. She says, she's cutting my hair, and she says, "So what do you do?" I said, "Well, I'm a pastor of a church just down the road." "Oh, what's the church name?" I said, "Name Open Door Church." And then, of course, my next question is going to be, "Do you attend church?" But before that, she goes, "Wow, you guys make a lot of money, don't you?" All right, so now I'm beginning to, I'm like, immediately I'm thinking, what lenses is she looking through? And so like, why would you say that? And so then off it goes, and she's explaining her worry, very negative about churches. It was a good conversation, and I enjoyed it. All right, so anyway, I'm trying to figure out that lens. So look, here's the present age. We got everybody looking through the world through different lenses. Someone once said it this way: we're living in a world where everyone believes in gravity, but not in moral gravity. Like everybody would assume the science and how it works for everybody, but when it comes to morality or spiritual issues, it's completely different. Now, I would say, unless you are in just a few rare places in the world, people are not hostile towards spirituality. I don't think that's the day in which we live. They're just suspicious of it. They're suspicious of any truth claims that you would make. I'm going to give a few quotes from Tim Keller as we think through this. One quote, Keller says, "If the church doesn't understand the stories our neighbors live by, we will never reach them with the story of the gospel." So we don't understand the stories that our neighbors live by, we're not going to be able to reach them with the story that they really need to hear. All right, a couple of scriptures to set our tone. One would be for you. You're affected by the cultural narratives that you live in. Right? So we're Christians, but we're also being invaded by the cultural narratives that I'm going to describe. And you have to make sure your gospel is right. Which is one of the big reasons why we're doing this, before you can share it with someone else. So Romans 12, don't be conformed by the age. All right, so don't be conformed by the age. Now, the reality is you're being conformed by it. You cannot, that word conformed literally means just molded, like a piece of clay. So it's impossible for the world not to mold us or shape us. We're fighting against it, basically. And the way we fight against it, Paul says, is be transformed by the renewing of our mind so we can discern what is good, pleasing, and the perfect will of God. All right, that's a worldview. To be conformed by the truth of God so that we can live good, pleasing lives that are in accordance with the will of God. That is a completely different worldview than most of your non-Christian neighbors or friends would have. They're not doing that. That's not what their goal is in life, is to submit themselves to the will of God. The second scripture is what Peter said to the church, "But in your hearts, regard Christ the Lord as holy," that's a worldview, "ready at any time to give defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do this with gentleness and reverence, keeping a clear conscience, so that when you are accused, those who disparage your good conduct in Christ will be put to shame." Which is exactly my situation with the lady who was controlling the clippers cutting my hair. Like initially I was like, am I supposed to be offended by this? I think she was just talking, kind of. But again, she had scissors in her hand near my face. So I was going to try to have the conversation as gentle as I could. But at the same time, what I didn't want is for her just to get turned off by what I had to say. And so I just thought it was an interesting way for me to try to explain my faith in church and my role in a way that Peter would say. I want to give a reason for the hope that's in me, and I want to do it with a clear conscience. But she was sort of making accusations, so I wanted to show my Christ-like conduct in having the conversation. I hope I did a good job. All right, now, let's consider these stories that people have. So again, Keller says, every culture tells a story about who we are, what's wrong with us, and how to fix it. Now, I agree with that, and for those who are doing the counseling training that I'm leading this fall, this is in part where I get my counseling methodology. I simply want to ask and answer the questions as to who we are, what motivates us, what's wrong with us, and how do we change, right? That's the goal. And this is the best way to engage a non-Christian with the gospel. Figure out who they are, what motivates them, how do they understand truth, what do they think is wrong with themselves and the world, and how do they change? Like everybody's looking for this. So the problem is, though, that most people have exchanged the answers to those questions with a story different than God's story. So let's just take a quick look at some of these cultural narratives that people live by. Again, these are the lenses that people look through, and it can be multiple ones, by the way, but Keller labels some of these. I've actually got a few more that I've added. I don't think I have time to add those, talk about those, so I'll just talk about these main ones. The first one is the identity narrative. All right, so again, the story in which people look at themselves and the world, and the identity narrative can be summarized by, I must be me. Or if you're talking with someone through that lens, you do you, right? You do you is an expression of the identity narrative, or I must be me. Now, with this narrative, here's the beauty of it. You get to be God in this narrative. You get to be God because you get to choose your identity. Now, the unfortunate thing is the choice that you make is super shallow. So when people are choosing their identity, it is like really, really shallow. Like they might choose their identity based on their gender. That is a really shallow way to describe yourself. By your gender, or the choice of your gender, or by your job, or by your political aspiration. It's super unfortunate. But the idea is you get to decide who you are, and you even get to decide what version of you are. So it would be like the Moana identity narrative, where she hears this voice inside her, and the voice inside her says, this is who you really are, or something like that. I was watching it with a grandchild on my lap, so I wasn't paying a ton of attention. But the voice inside you tells you who you are. Well, that's pretty common. And the interesting thing about this identity narrative, though, you get to frame it out. Like, you don't allow anything to challenge that, to invade what you want to be. So I saw a clip from, I didn't watch the movie, the Barbie movie. Anybody see the Barbie movie? Okay, so at the beginning of the Barbie movie, raise your hand if you need to fill me in on this, on the context. From the clip I saw, it's like Barbie world, and there's a whole thing going on, and then Barbie interrupts the Barbie world by saying, hey, by the way, does anybody think about death? Is that right? Is that near the beginning, right? Okay, all right, good. I didn't watch the movie. All right, so here's Barbie in Barbie world, and everything's happy-go-lucky and whatnot. And Barbie invades Barbie world by something transcendent, by asking the question about death. And I guess everybody's just like, and no one had an answer, right? So again, that's what I mean by when people choose an identity narrative other than the identity that God has for you, it's a super shallow narrative that they built. Now, I only say that for you to gain a sense of brokenness over how unfortunate it is that that's sort of the identity that people are choosing. And maybe just make some money, or just make sure that whatever you do in life, you don't miss out on things, or what's the next fun thing to do, or the list could go on and on. But with this identitative, it is you sort of acting as a little God and then creating this little identity. Follow your heart, right? That's sort of the mentality behind it. But in fact, the truth is that our identity is a sacred thing determined by God. It is not something that we create, it's something that we receive. And the identity that we have and the identity that we get to offer others is not shallow. It is deep and it is complex because we're made in God's image. And now, because of the gospel, we even can conform ourselves to the identity of Christ. As Paul said, it's no longer who I live, but Christ who lives in me. So Keller says in the gospel, you don't achieve your identity through performance. You receive it as an act of grace. I get to have the identity of Jesus. I get to obtain this identity which allows me to conform to the image of Christ. And it's so much deeper than any narrative that I would choose as to who I am. All right, we can talk about that more maybe later. The second is the freedom narrative. And in the freedom narrative, the mentality is, I must be free to live out my truth. I must be free to live out my truth. It's really paradoxical because the interesting about the freedom narrative is so American. We're all about freedom. But the thing is, it's super oppressive to everybody else. While you're demanding your freedom, you're oppressing everybody else. It's like your freedoms are my restrictions. And I'm like, yeah, but what about my freedoms? I don't care about your freedoms. I have to be free to do whatever I want to do. I am free to live out my truth. I say, yeah, but when that hinders my freedom, I don't care about that, right? And so it's like this vague attempt at total anarchy, but it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Secular freedom demands the absence of restrictions, which in essence then is restricting. It restricts everybody else. Right? Don't tell me what I can do. Don't tell me what I cannot do is totally restricting me. If someone said that to me, you cannot tell me what I can do or what I can't do, then you've just restricted me. Now, you don't want to be restricted, but you don't have a problem restricting me, and this is basically what destroys relationships and families and even churches and cultures. This is sort of demand for an unwarranted freedom. It really is, I think, another way to think of consumerism. And with little regard to others, it would be the opposite of loving your neighbor to have this narrative. But it's being forced into the souls of our neighbors and our children. The gospel freedom is completely different, right? Gospel freedom is freedom from yourself, right? So it's not, don't tell me what I can or cannot do. Gospel freedom frees us from that. Where now we don't live for ourselves at all. We're living for God, for others, to fulfill the great commands to love God and to love each other. This freedom narrative is as ridiculous as if you were a fish swimming around in your fish tank at home. And as you're swimming around in your fish tank at home, you're watching those creatures outside the fish tank walk in and out of rooms, and you're like, hey, I'm tired of being restricted by this fish tank. And so at the appropriate moment, when the lid is open to put some food in, you just jump out. And then you die. The thought is, I want to be able the freedom to move around just like you're moving around. It's not liberation. It's slow death. When you have this narrative that you live by, it's not freedom. And honestly, if you really want to dig deep in this, you have to consider the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche, because he's trying to promote this more than anyone. He just basically said, let's just murder God. God is dead. It's now about you. You become the ultimate individual in your eyes, and you just demand it. So Nietzsche is, in essence, I think, the most extreme promoter of this, and everybody else in some way or shape is just following after him. Whereas the gospel would say, if the Son sets you free, you'll be free indeed. And Psalm 119, 145, which is all about the scriptures, right? It was where we find our truth. Psalm 119, 145 says, I will walk in freedom, for I've devoted myself to your commandments. Now, is that an oxymoron? I submit myself to your words, and that's when I walk in freedom. Right? Well, that's what the Bible would say is true freedom. It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. So another quote from Keller, real freedom is not the absence of constraints, it's finding the right ones that fit our divine nature. Our third narrative is the truth narrative, or basically, and again, this one sort of filters through all of them, I decide what's right and wrong for me. So truth becomes personal, emotional, and situational. So truth is in the eye of the beholder. Truth is what I decide truth to be. And it is very emotional for a lot of people what truth is. It's very emotional. And when you then step on their understanding of truth or their truth narrative, and you press upon the emotion of it in their lives, they can really respond. I had this conversation with someone the other day, and wow, the conversation got emotional very quickly, and I was like, whoa, where did all this emotion come from? Well, this, and I can't believe this, and da-da-da. I was like, yeah, but wow. So there's a lot of emotion attached to this conversation right now. And honestly, I don't think we worked through it because there was just too much emotion. Hopefully we can pick it up later. But it was because the person felt I was infringing on what they had decided the truth of the matter was. I'm sure your marriages have never suffered with this, or your parenting relationships have never, ever suffered with this. You've never had a person who was emotional, who felt like their truth was the true truth. But this is how people live. And remember, again, everyone has to have a narrative. Right? Everyone has to have a narrative of what truth is, and they're going to live by that. Like, this is the guiding narrative, because it's going to form what they believe and what they desire and what they value. So once you know this is how people operate, and as you're learning their story and you're figuring out, okay, this is what you value, it's going to be attached to some truth narrative that they have created. Where for us, the gospel proclaims that truth has been embodied in a person, Jesus Christ. So where Jesus uses this analogy, right? Build your life upon me, it'll stand firm. When you build your life around an alternative truth narrative, it's like trying to build a house on sinking sand. It's like these poor beachside homes right now on the coast of North Carolina that are just falling into the ocean, which is so sad. Well, bad choice of location to put your home. And Jesus is asking us to do that. Or another way to see it, and just visualize it, like, don't say this to a lost person because you want to love them with the gospel, not offend them. But I want you to imagine the non-Christian as trying to build a house on Jell-O. And they keep trying to construct it, and the Jell-O is just all wobbly and shaky, and it just keeps breaking and falling apart, and they keep trying to rebuild it, and the entire foundation is Jell-O. And now you're like walking on the Jell-O trying to get close to them because you're like trying to help them understand, dude, you're building your life on Jell-O. You got to stop this. Like, why don't you consider getting off of this and building your life upon the foundation of Jesus Christ? Just consider an alternative. Like, for me, and I don't come to the Bible questioning it. I just come to the Bible seeking truth. It's not Jell-O to me. It's rock solid. All I'm doing when I come to the Bible is just trying to figure out how I build my life upon this. And it's firm, and it's a firm foundation for me. So Jesus says that, I'm the truth. Isaiah actually says in 5:20, woe to those who call evil good and good evil. And that's the culture in which we live. And yet the prophet gives a woe, a danger warning for anyone who would call evil good or good evil. John Piper says, when you relativize truth, you relativize everything. And that includes justice, love, and meaning. But again, the truth narrative is someone who's going to say, I'm all about justice, love, and kindness and meaning, but it's their context. And they demand you then to go live in their house made on a Jell-O foundation. They want you to wobble along with them. They just don't want you to question it. Like that's kind of the thing, because if you question it, it's a house of cards, right? And this is why I think we have to be sensitive, because when people's lives are built on a house of cards, just one card and it all comes crumbling down, that terrifies them. So people are doubling down on it, and here's what they're doing. People will always try to, misery loves company. People will always try to find a community that identifies as close as they can with them. Now, again, it's still wobbly and it leads to disaster ultimately, but they're going to, at least for a while, like, oh, you believe what I do on this and this and this? Okay, let's do community together, because we can at least wobble together on our houses built on Jell-O or houses built on sinking sand. And those community groups are pretty much found readily on social media now. Just got to look, and you'll find your wobbly group that will affirm your identity narrative. All right, two more. The next one is the science or progress narrative. And this is where the mentality is religion hinders progress. So this has been around quite some time, but sort of increasing, I think, in its veracity because of technology. So now we've got, with social media and the internet, technology and what we find it communicates has become our savior, right? It is our life. It is the lens in which most people view the world is the lens of their smartphone. So this is their identity, right? This is their story, and that technology has changed them more than anything else. But what they find in it is basically that technology replaces a need for an alternative salvation. Yet, despite the innovation, as Jonathan Haidt says in his book, The Anxious Generation, we're more anxious and divided than ever. So despite all the technological advancements, we are now, at least young adults and young people, are at the highest level of anxiety and loneliness in modern history. So more screens, more shallow souls, and that's kind of where we live. This science and progress narrative does more damage than we realize, and this is, like, I think, one of the huge dangers about education. So I'm just really a torn individual when it comes to any type of public education or college or university, because what I got in my public school and college was just an absolute attack on religion. It was subtle in some ways and just outright in other ways, and it really caused me to stumble in my faith because I was an immature, and just kind of wondering. So, like, I do see the value. It's just got to be in the right context with I think, in the right frame of mind. I think that this narrative is why we see the statistics that 3 out of 4 kids who grew up in church quit going after college. It's this narrative. So, parents, you got to take that as what it is, and make sure if you're going to put your kids, like I did, put my kids in public schools, I did my best to ground them prior to that and try to stay up with them along the way. And still, I'm sure they would say there were some real challenges there. Keller says our culture has replaced faith in God with faith in progress, but progress without purpose only escalates lostness. I like that statement. Progress without purpose only escalates lostness. And finally, the justice narrative is pretty common these days, and that is basically we must promote equality at all costs. So the Bible is all about justice, but it is God's justice, and it has parameters on it. Justice is vital, but without God, it becomes self-righteous and oppressive. Again, this is a sort of an oxymoron, because those who are demanding justice are oppressing everybody else with their demands. It's just for you, but when it then oppresses me, then you don't care about that. It just can't be that way. It can't be everyone gets to decide what justice is and the demand for it, and there's nothing we can do about it or contradict it, even when we feel oppressed by it. So then it's just all self-contradiction. And we see this all over the place, where the gospel gives us the true foundation for justice, and that is God's holiness and grace. So in my worldview, God gets to decide what is just. But God also decides what's sinful. So you don't just get to demand justice. God gets to decide what oppression is. I don't get to decide what oppression is. So the gospel actually gives us the foundation for it. And by the way, the cross is the perfect symbol of justice united with mercy, because actual sin was punished, and yet sinners are pardoned because of the activity of Jesus. So we do justice, but we also love mercy, and we also walk humbly with God, as the prophet Micah says, because God is the just and the justifier. Again, another quote from Keller: a society that wants justice without Jesus will end up with judgment without mercy. And I think that's what we're seeing these days, is people just wanting to judge everybody by way of this justice narrative. So conclusion. Everyone has these longings. Everyone has this story in which they see the world through. So we just need to come along and provide the actual fulfillment of their stories. So if someone is looking at the world through the identity narrative, basically their longing is, I just want to be known. I want to have an identity. Well, we come along and say, well, you can be known and loved in Christ. You can have an identity greater than any identity you've ever thought about before. It's in Jesus. For the person who says, I want to be free, then we come along and say, well, Jesus tells us that freedom comes through surrender. That's when freedom comes. Yeah, I want to be free too. I'm going to find it differently than you. I'm going to do it through my surrender, not through my demands. I want truth, absolutely. And I want truth as well. I want truth just as much as you. I have found it in the person of Jesus Christ. Everything he says is true, and it has transformed my worldview and my life. I want progress, absolutely. I want progress too. It's Jesus who makes all things new. If you want humankind to progress, let's all decide we just need to be more like Jesus. And finally, I want justice. Yes. That's why the cross is so important, because there the cross satisfies justice and offers mercy. Last quote from Keller. The gospel is not one more competing story. It's the story that makes sense of all the other stories. The gospel is not just another story. Oh, you're religious. That's your word. No, no, no. It's more than being religious. No, no. My worldview is the worldview of all worldviews. I know that sounds arrogant, but it's true because Christ is the supreme of all things. And so it's the story that makes sense of everything else. Now, what I want us to consider is how we engage people. We do this. First, we listen to them, and we try to identify with their worldview. Like, what story is someone living in? That's the lady who's cutting my hair. So I'm like, I got a few minutes here, and I'm not trying to look at the horrible haircut she's given me. But how can I jump into her worldview? How can I jump into her story? I said, so what made you think that all pastors are rich? Oh, and she tells me a story about a guy who was a manipulative church leader. Oh, okay. How'd that affect you, right? Trying to understand what they're living in, right? Be quick to listen, slow to speak. Just listen. Try to understand the lies hidden in their belief system. That's a really important part of this gospel conversation, is to identify the lies that are guiding them. Because if they are believing lies, they're in trouble. And they are believing lies. They don't know that. And so how can I come alongside lovingly and question, maybe you shouldn't believe this. Maybe you should reconsider this. And then tell your story along Christ's story. At some point in time, you get to tell your story. It's just another way for us to be light in the world, which is what we want to do, right? We want to be salt. We want to be light. This whole conversation this morning and now this afternoon is about being salt and light. All right, several charges, and then we'll have our panel discussion. Charge number 1, don't curse the darkness, light your candle. If you spend your time cursing the darkness, you're not going to gain a hearing. Light the candle. Be light. Charge number 2, don't fear the world. Engage it with grace and truth. Like, I've seen too many Christians who decide they're just out. They're going to go live in a commune somewhere and build a greenhouse, and they're just going to force their family in the greenhouse, and hopefully Jesus will come before they all die. We don't do that. We are thrust into the world. We're not supposed to separate ourselves from it. We're not afraid. We just need to engage it. Third charge, don't retreat from culture. Don't run away. Engage it, enter it, and try to redeem it. Right? It's why we need Christian songwriters, Christian artists, Christian movies, Christian this, Christian athletes, Christian, everything. Engaged in culture. We just need Christian everything, engaging into the world that Christ came to save and redeem. We redeem it with the gospel. Next charge, speak the truth amidst moral confusion, gender identity, and morality. You have to, I think someone said this, we got to speak. We have to use words. It's okay, even if those words come across to some as offensive or harsh. If we speak the truth in love, then you can't be judged for not loving somebody with truth. You have to speak the truth in love. It's the only way to try to engage all the confusion that's taking place. Last charge. Live beautiful lives and build beautiful things. This is what we do as Christians, right? This is the mandate that we have. As we engage this world, as we try to establish Christ's kingdom in this world, let's live beautiful lives so that others might look at us and go, hey, so what are you all about? And let's build beautiful things. Let's build beautiful families. Let's build beautiful churches. Let's build beautiful businesses. Let's accomplish some things. Let's do that because we want to engage this world and not live apart from it. If you don't live out your faith in the world, you may have religion, but you don't have the gospel.